Welcome to According to Sam, folks. This is episode 421. Thank you for joining me. Hope you guys had a great Independence weekend, 4th of July. I have a really good podcast for you guys today. We're going to pick up where we left off in the last podcast, and it's in relationship to the anniversary birthday that we just celebrated, the anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, which, if you know the history, was a monumental human event. It's the first time that there was a challenge to global empires and monarchies and nobility, and the concept, even though everyone wasn't free and you still had slavery and, you still had issues, the franchise that was created after, it was a decade after the Declaration of Independence, because the Declaration of Independence was just that. It was saying that we're independent and we're prepared to fight you for our independence. King George is what that declaration is. They knew that they were going to have to fight for the independence, but the celebration of the July 4th that we just celebrated, the 200th anniversary, is the anniversary of that declaration. They still had to fight for it after even winning. The colonies went from being colonies to different provinces under the Articles of Confederation for a period of time, and then they got together in Philadelphia and created the Constitution, which was finalized after the 9th province, New Hampshire, after they ratified the Constitution in 1788, is when the nation finally became a country. So it hadn't quite been 200 years or 250 years of the United States being a country. It's been, about 200. And so it would be 38 would be the actual 250th anniversary of the nation. So we are 12 years away from that. So 238 years. Wow. 238 years, which is interesting because we've been relating the United States in our third century crises to the crises of the third century of the Roman Empire. And you can see that the crisis of the third century of the Roman Empire starts at 235, and the actual birthday of the United States would mean the actual, and the funny thing too is that when New Hampshire ratified the Constitution, making the formation of the United States complete, and it was in June of 17. So anyway, we're around that same time period. So the crises of the third century that happened in the Roman Empire is what we've been talking about, and we've been relating it to the crises of the United States, the mini crises that we are experiencing right now in our third century that threaten the survival of the United States. Will the United States still be here 50 years from now, 100 years from now, another 200 years is the question. And in the Roman Empire, the crises of the third century changed the Roman Empire forever. The Roman Empire had its zenith, its high point, which is Pax Romana, and then it went into crises after Pax Romana, the crisis of the third century, and there was a reunification and bringing the empire together again by it was actually Aurelian, who united the empire again, but then he's assassinated by his men, and then Diocletian comes along, and Diocletian creates Tetrarchy, and then Tetrarchy unites the empire for a while, and then Diocletian actually dies of old age. I think that he may have been the first emperor to die of old age he actually retired. He retires from being an emperor and then passes on the power of the empire to his vice emperor. That's what tetrarchy is. He created the system of tetrarchy. And then Constantine comes along. They, reunites the empire after fighting first to unite the western part of the empire, and then he goes to the east and unites the end. Then he moves the capital from the west to the east, and then that's when the Byzantine Empire starts. But it all started with the third century crisis. That the third century crisis changed the Roman Empire forever. Who knows what is going to come of the United States and our third century crisis? Will the United States fragment like the Roman Empire? Will it cease to exist? Will it be conquered? Who knows? Anyway, the crisis of the third century, we were relating back again the quote from Alexander Fraser Tyler, the Scottish judge and historian, who says that a democracy is always temporary in nature. It simply cannot exist as a permanent form of government. A democracy will continue to exist up until the time that voters discover that they can vote themselves generous gifts. I think that in the original quote, and this is attributed to him, we don't really even know that he wrote this, but I've seen this where it says not generous gifts, but largesse, which is the same thing as generous gifts. They can vote themselves generous gifts from the public treasury. And from that moment on, the majority always votes for the candidate who promised the most benefits from the public treasury, with the result that every democracy will finally collapse due to loose fiscal policies, which always follow by dictatorship. Public treasury. People don't understand what the public treasury is. Well, how does the public get treasury? It's through taxation. That's how it is. So, and the cycle that Tyler theorized was that the democracies go from bondage to great faith. Think about the United States and the past 250, 240 years of United States history. Go from bondage. That's what the Revolutionary War was. That the colonies here, they were subjects of King George. So you got to understand that yes, there was slavery in the United States, but them themselves, they were slaves because they were subjects to King George. From bondage to faith, from faith to courage, from courage to liberty, from liberty to abundance, from abundance to selfishness, from selfishness to complacency, from complacency to apathy, from apathy to dependence, and back to bondage, to dictatorship. So we were relating, what Tyler says, and he says it's about 200 years. Look at all of these empires throughout, not just the Roman Empire. We're focusing on the Roman Empire, but other empires, you can name them. It's around that third century where they start experiencing issues that threaten their survival. We talked about the issues threatening the Romans in their third century, the migration and barbarian invasion. Why did they call them barbarians? They were called barbarians because all of these Goths were coming over. These German Goths were coming over the Danube and Rhine rivers when they would freeze in the wintertime, and then they would cross these rivers into Roman territory, and they spoke this, language that's why they called them barbarians. It was like ba 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 ba. It was a barbarian language that they spoke. So that's why they called them barbarians, because they didn't speak the language. So the invasion and migrations of the barbarians into the Roman territory. This is parallel. These are issues. We're going to get to this crisis. Civil wars, peasant rebellions, political instability, multiple usurpers competing for power. This led to the debasement of currency, another parallel. The breakdown of trade networks and economic productivity and plague. So, like I said, some of these issues that Rome was dealing with parallel to some of the issues that we're dealing with, but some of the issues that we're dealing with are unique to us. And we've identified 6 crises so far. We identified the election crises. We identified the education, ignorance crises in this country, all intentional. The election crisis is intentional. The education crisis is intentional. The debt crisis is intentional. The treason crisis is happening. And then the racial tribalism crises, the division crises, and the Marxism crises that we talked about in the last podcast. And we're going to sit here for a little bit. Now that we're beyond the 4th of July, relating this all to the 250th anniversary of the country. Like I said, who knows? There are a lot more crises that I want to get into. I want to get into the crises of our information crises and our media. I want to get into the morality crises and family. We have more crises that we're going to add to this list, but we're going to sit here for a bit at the Marxist crises, because like I said in the last podcast, all of these relate to the rise of Marxism. All of these are intentional, and all of these are set up to create the ideal environment for Marxism to rise. They know the conditions that are necessary for Marxism to rise. And this is about creating the conditions for Marxism to rise. This has been a process that has taken place in the United States to subvert the United States from within. The United States is a powerful nation. You don't attack a powerful nation from the north, south, east, or west. You have to attack the United States as the fifth column from within to bring down. That's what the treason crisis is about, to bring it down from within. And this has been a process to subvert the United States, the rise of Marxism, for decades. That's what subversion is. We talked about the definition of subversion. The definition of subversion is to undermine the power and authority of an established system or institution. That's what Satan does in the book of Genesis. When you read in the book of Genesis, the story of Adam and Eve, that's why Satan is allegorized as a serpent. Because if you read it, and I think it's in the King James, it says, now the serpent was more subtle. The serpent was more, I've seen it also translated as the serpent was more cunning. The serpent was more sneaky. That's what the book of Genesis is talking about, and why the serpent is, because the serpent doesn't come head on. The serpent comes as a sneaky. He's sneaky. He's cunning. He's subtle. That's what subversion is. That's what JFK was talking about in his famous speech that he gave and to the press corps. You can look at the date on this speech. This is the speech that John F. Kennedy gives just after he is elected in 1961. You can see the date on this speech is April 27th, 1961. He's sworn in on January 20th. So this is just 3 months after John F. Kennedy is sworn in as president of the United States. He has given this speech. And if you haven't read it, you should go read it. But we're going to read a little bit of it here. He's talking about secrecy. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths and secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweigh the dangers which are cited to justify them. What is it? We've decided that unwarranted concealment, unwarranted classification of pertinent facts far outweigh the dangers in which are cited to justify it. Sources and methods. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by intimidating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there's little value in ensuring the survival of our nation. If our traditions do not survive with it. I'm going to read that again. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of, if a nation, if the United States doesn't survive with our traditions, the things that make America, America, then that's not America anymore, is what he's saying here. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is a very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. Let's get down here. What he says. Get to the important part in a minute. He says right here, our way of life is under attack. The president of the United States, 3 months after being sworn in, our way of life is under attack. Those who make themselves our enemy are advancing around the globe. The survival of our friends is in danger. And yet no war has been declared. No borders have been crossed. What is he saying? That they're not coming at us head on. They're not coming at us from the north, south, east, and west. They're coming. No borders have been crossed. They're coming at us from the fifth column, from within. And yet no war has been declared. No borders have been crossed. No marching troops, no missiles have been fired. But we're still at war. He's saying we're still at war. We're at war right now. Our way of life is under attack. Where's the important part? Right here. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic. Okay, listen, let me take my time. Folks, I'm going to be cooking. Today. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence. The serpent relies on covert means in the garden. He's subtle. He's crafty. He's sneaky. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion. Fifth column. On subversion. John F. Kennedy is using this word, subversion. On subversion instead of elections. This monolithic, ruthless conspiracy that relies on covert means, it relies on infiltration instead of invasion. Fifth column. On subversion instead of elections. Fifth column. On intimidation instead of free choice. On guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has comprised vast human and material resources into building a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praise. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. It conducts the Cold War, in short, with a wartime discipline no democracy would ever hope or wish to match. I want you to listen to John F. Kennedy before they killed him, these people who killed him before. And see, that's the thing. You read that, you also listen to, so this is the thing. This is 3 months, April 27th, 1961. John Kennedy is sworn in on January 20th, 1961. So just 3 months before this is when he's sworn in. The night before he's sworn in, or a few days before he's sworn in, it may have been the night before he's sworn in, is when Dwight Eisenhower gives his famous farewell address, where Dwight Eisenhower is repeating most of what John F. Kennedy, Dwight Eisenhower, a Republican, John Kennedy, a Democrat, and they're both saying the same thing about this enemy, this godless enemy that we're facing. And we read Dwight Eisenhower's farewell address, and we read Kennedy's speech that he gave 3 months after being sworn in, basically saying the same thing about this monolithic conspiracy that threatens the survival of our nation. And we're thinking the Soviet Union. We're thinking that this is a threat that's abroad. But no, if you read, especially what Kennedy's saying here, he's saying, no, it's here. It's domestic. It's here. It's right here with us. It's right here with us. It's here.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed.
They're going to kill this guy. And within 2 years of this guy's going to be taken out by these people that he's talking about there. Now, subversion. We're still talking about subversion. Now, we're going to get into a little bit more of this interview that Yuri Brezhnev did in the 1970s. Now, Yuri Brezhnev is he was a officer in the USSR, and he defected from the USSR and then came to the United States. And he gave this interview to G. Edward Griffin in the 1970s. And I mean, everything the point I want to make is that we were warned. We were warned by Kennedy. We were warned by Dwight Eisenhower with his farewell address. We were warned many times about what is happening right now. We were warned. And what is happening right now is what is being brought to fruition is decades of a plan that has been slowly put in place to usurp the United States, to subvert the United States from within. And that's what Brezhnev says here. Now, I want you to listen to what he says here, because we're going to get further into this. Take a listen.
Well, you spoke several times before about ideological subversion. That is a phrase that I'm afraid some Americans don't fully understand. When the Soviets use the phrase ideological subversion, what do they mean by it?
Ideological subversion is the process which is legitimate, overt, and open. You can see it with your own eyes. All you have to do, all American mass media has to do, is to unplug their bananas from their ears, open up their eyes, and they can see it. There is no mystery. There is nothing to do with espionage. I know that espionage intelligence gathering looks more romantic. It sells more deodorants through the advertising, probably. That's why your Hollywood producers are so crazy about James Bond type of thrillers. But in reality, the
subversion, Hollywood is part of the subversion. Hollywood's part of the subversion.
Type of thrillers. But in reality, the main emphasis of the KGB is not in the area of intelligence at all. According to my opinion and opinion of many defectors of my caliber, only about 15% of time, money, and manpower is spent on espionage as such. The other 85% is a slow process.
Slow process. This is a slow process. That's what I'm telling you. That what you're seeing now that is happening in the United States was set in motion decades ago. And this is a slow process of subverting the United States. Again, you don't attack a nation like the United States that has the strengths of the United States. And I'm not just talking about economic strengths. I'm talking about moral strengths, the strengths of strong families, the strength of the Protestant work ethic, all those things. You don't a educated populace that like the United States, had prior to the design destruction of the education here in the United States prior to all that. These things that made the United States strong. That's what made the United States strong. So you don't attack the United States head on when the United States has strengths like that. You have to attack the pillars of the United States slowly over time. A slow usurpation, subversion is what Yuri is talking about here.
15% of time, money, and manpower is spent on espionage as such. The other 85% is a slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically
psychological
means is
warfare.
to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in four basic stages.
All right, so he says it's a process that goes very slow that is divided into 4 separate stages. Okay, so 4 separate stages. Stage 1. Tell us what stage 1 is, Yuri.
Which goes very slow, and it's divided in 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization.
The first stage is demoralization. What is demoralization, people? Well, the root word of demoralization is moral or morale. Morale, okay? And it's funny because we just, we have this every year during the 4th of July, people, I'm not celebrating 4th of July, I don't care about the United States. I am against the United States, and especially if you're black, we were slaves during 1776. I'm not celebrating the 4th of July. All of that. That George Washington. You heard the clip of Obama. We'll probably play it in the next podcast, saying George Washington. I can have these competing views because George Washington was a great general who brought about the revolution, but he's also a slave owner. Well, your ancestors owned slaves too, Obama. I'm going to talk about what Obama, we're going to be cooking in the next podcast, I promise you. But that's what it's all about. It's all the process of demoralization. They want to take the moral away. This is what I mean about destroying the pillars of the United States that made the United States great. One of the pillars of the United States that made the United States great was the morale, the pride in the United States. Demoralize. What does the word demoralize mean? Cause someone to lose confidence or hope. Dispirit, to take the spirit away from the country. To cause someone to lose confidence or hope. It's so funny because Obama came on the scene in 2008 with the hope and change. It wasn't about hope. His job was to demoralize, to take the hope away, to take the spirit away. That's what demoralization is. Let's listen to more of Yuri here, talking about the first step in subverting a nation is demoralization.
Process which goes very slow, and it's divided in 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate 1 generation of students in the country of your enemy. Exposed
so you have to take over the education system. So you use the education system to demoralize the nation. Understand where this is happening. This is happening in the education system, which is used to demoralize the nation. Why are all these kids coming out and the only thing they know about America is that America, killed the Indians. They kept everyone in slaves. Everything is bad about America. The only thing America has ever done is bad. That's done through the education system. That's part of the demoralization, which is done through the education system, is what Yuri's telling you.
Minimum number of years which requires to educate 1 generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The result The result you can see.
Demoralization.
Most of the people who graduated in the 60s, dropouts or half-baked intellectuals, are now occupying the positions of power.
They're the ones teaching the kids. They're the ones that are the professors. They're the ones in the media. They're the ones that, listen to what he's saying. The people that are running things right now in the United States. I mean, he said this in the 1980s. I think he gave this interview. It says they're 84. I mean, folks, we're so beyond this. Yes, all of these half-baked loons that were indoctrinated into Marxism are the ones running everything. They're running the media. They're running the colleges. They're running the public schools, the elementary schools. They're everywhere.
You can see most of the people who graduated in the 60s, dropouts or half-baked intellectuals, are now occupying the positions of power in the government, civil service, business, mass media, educational system. You are stuck with them. You cannot get rid of them. They are contaminated. They are programmed to think and react to certain stimuli in a certain pattern.
Wow. He's saying a lot. So demoralization, we're going to get more into Yuri's interview here, but demoralization, you want to see the effects of demoralization? This segment was released on CNN. Harry Enten, their data analyst. Take a listen to this. This is demoralization.
Erica, my friend, happy 4th of July. And today on our Independence Day, I'm looking into whether or not Americans feel proud to be an American. And as it turns out, Democrats, their percentage who say they're proud to be an American has fallen through the floor. What are we talking about? Take a look here. Democrats' pride to be an American, extremely or very proud. In 2015, look at this. 4 out of 5 Democrats were extremely or very proud to be an American. That number has plummeted to just
demoralization
36% now in 2025, a low this century.
And this is why nihilism is so. So if you take the moral away from people, you demoralize them, then you have a rise in nihilism, and that's what you see. You see the rise in nihilism, which is what the communists want. They want the rise in nihilism, because when people have no moral and they're nihilistic, that creates the environment where Marxism can rise. What I'm telling you is that these people are creating the environment for Marxism to thrive, so Marxism can flourish, so Marxism can rise. So demoralization is part of it. You can see the evidence. This is what it is. No moral, no pride in the nation, no to be dispirited, as the definition says. The etymology, I have the etymology here. To demoralize etymology, to corrupt or undermine the morals of. To corrupt or undermine the morals of, to remove the moral. That's what's happening here. That's what demoralization is. This is the evidence of it right here.
As it turns out, Democrats, their percentage who say they're proud to be an American has fallen through the floor. What are we talking about? Take a look here. Democrats' pride to be an American, extremely or very proud. In 2015, look at this. 4 out of 5 Democrats were extremely or very proud to be an American. That number has plummeted to just 36% now in 2025. A low this century has fallen by more than half since 2015, as Donald Trump has become, of course, president once again this year. Now, what is driving that decline? Well, a lot of it has to do with age. What are we talking about? Well, Generation Z Democrats, proud to be an American or not. Of course, Generation Z, born since 1997. Look at this. Only 24% of Generation Z Democrats are extremely or very proud to be an American. That is actually lower, Erica. That is lower than the percentage who say they have little or no pride to be an American at 32%. I just never thought I'd see these numbers based upon where we were a decade ago, but that's exactly where we are. Now, if Democrats have extremely less pride to be an American than they used to, what about Republicans? Well, this is where the trend line gets interesting. Because with Republicans, there is no trend line. In fact, take a look here. Republicans' pride to be an American, extremely or very proud. In 2015, it was 90% back when Barack Obama was serving his second term. Now in Donald Trump's second term, it's basically the same percentage, 92%. So Republicans still are extremely or very proud to be an American. Democrats.
And you notice it's something that is going on in the left wing, in the Democratic Party. That's where the rise of democratic socialism is going on. It's not going on in the Republican Party. It's going on in the Democratic Party. So we were talking about the the two novels by Eric Blair, George Orwell that he wrote in the 1940s, and these brilliant books explain communism better than anyone else can explain it. I explained in the last podcast a little bit that Eric Blair, in his younger days, that he grew up with socialists, communists, Marxists, and going to affluent schools, even though he wasn't affluent like many of his friends. He saw that many of these affluent friends of his were embracing socialism and communism, and he was kind of perplexed by it. Why was it something, even today, you look at the DSA, and I mean, it has anything to do with them being, white or black, but they are mostly white, and they are mostly affluent white kids with advanced college degrees, and yes, this is what Orwell witnessed and saw. If you read his essays and read what he wrote outside of 1984 in Animal Farm, he was very clear about his opinions of Marxism, socialism, communism. It's interesting. People say that, and they're arguing over terms, that socialism is different from communism. Trump's calling it communism. It's not communism. It's socialism. Socialism is not a bad thing. Communism is, and we're different. What did the USSR stand for? The USSR stood for the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Let me read that again. Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Socialism. Socialism and communism, you're only talking about methods. It's the same thing. It's Marxism is what we're talking about. And the interesting thing about George Orwell's two masterpieces, first Animal Farm. Animal Farm was written in 1945, and then he 3 years later wrote 1984. If you haven't read these books, I'm going to explain a little bit about them. But they're both really small books, and I recommend them. I study these books and read these books, and make notations and highlight the way I do the Bible, because I love these two books because they tell you so much about Marxism. When you read 1984, it's all told through the main character. His name is Winston, and he's noticing the society in Oceania. There's this period in the book where Winston is talking about how the slow subversion, the slow usurpation happened in Oceania. And he says that I can remember a time when it wasn't like this, but I can't remember when the change happened and it became this totalitarian state that Oceania had become under the insunk English Socialism Party. Socialism. Says, I don't remember how it got this way, but I can remember it not being this way. And it was a slow usurpation, slow subversion to get us to this point where I'm telling this story, the story that's told in 1984. But it didn't tell how the socialist society, English socialism, got to the state that it was in this totalitarian state. But if you read Animal Farm tells you how Oceania got to be Oceania, this state that happened. It always starts with a revolution. It always starts. And even though Winston in 1984 couldn't remember the revolution, when Orwell writes, when he writes Animal Farm explains the revolution that made Oceania what it is when he writes 1984. 3 years earlier, before 1984, he had written the book that explained the revolution that got Winston in the state that he was in, that got all of the citizens of Oceania in the state that they were in English socialism under the totalitarian rule of the party. He explains it in Animal Farm. The revolution. So Animal Farm starts with the revolution. The animals take over. The animals. Animal Farm is all about the Bolshevik Revolution. Animal Farm explains how the Russian czars were defeated, and the Russian czars. If you've read Animal Farm, Mr. Jones represents the Russian czars, and Animal Farm explains how the Russian czars were defeated by the Bolsheviks and how the Union of Soviet Republics, socialist republics, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics came about. It's explained. The revolution that brought about Oceania in 1984 is explained in Animal Farm. And if you read the animals in the beginning of the revolution, they're all excited. It's all about the Bolshevik revolutions that happens in 1917. The old major pig, it represents Lenin. Napoleon is Stalin. Snowball is Trotsky. All the animals represent all the people in the revolution. My favorite character is the cat, because Orwell says that after the revolution, when everybody's working, the cat would only appear at dinner time. We all know somebody like the cat. But he explains how the animals are so excited for the revolution in the beginning. And then Napoleon, Stalin, when he takes control, he takes the puppies and he takes it. The book says that there's 2 dogs on the farm, and they have puppies. Napoleon takes the puppies from their moms even before they were finished weaning, and he took control over them and their education is what Orwell says. And then the puppies become ferocious dogs, and then the puppies become ferocious dogs, and they're the ones who Napoleon uses to inflict this totalitarian regime on the people. And then the people go from being excited because they were used as cogs in this revolution. But after the revolution, they find out that the pigs are no different than the czars. The pigs were no different than Mr. Jones. And that all people, and that all animals are equal, all people are equal, but some are more equal than others. It all starts with the revolution. It all starts with the revolution. So we're talking about these people. These people did it to you. These people did it to you. And I was explaining to you in the last podcast, you say, well, what would Bill Clinton, George Bush, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, why would they want to bring about communism? They're capitalists. They're rich. They obviously love, capitalism because they've made so much money off of capitalism. They're rich. Why would they want socialism? Socialism is this ideology for poor people where there's no food, there's no products, there's no resources, everything is rationed. Why would they want that? And I was explaining to you in the last podcast because you understand communism, the communism is different from the perspective of the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. There's only 2 class systems. There's the proletariat, the workers, and the bourgeoisie, those who own the means of production. And for the bourgeoisie, who these guys see themselves as, communism is great. There's wealthy communists. There's always been very wealthy communists. That's what the pigs are in Animal Farm. The pigs go from leading the revolution to going into the manor house, to putting on Mr. Jones's clothes. They are the new bourgeoisie. They are running things. From their perspective, everything's good. I want you to listen to what Yuri Brezhnev says here about that. Take a listen. Listen to Yuri.
Simply paid by your crazy publishers.
What he's asked, what was it like? This is early on in the interview. J.R. Griffin asked, what was it like living under communist Russia?
Differences, of course, in the daily life are very various, depending on whom we are talking about.
Who are we talking about? Who are we talking about here? You're asking me. So the question that J.R. Griffin asks him, he says, now, what was it like living in communism? He says, what was it like living in communism? Basically, it depends on who you're talking about. Are you talking about the bourgeoisie or are you talking about the proletariat? That's what Yuri says here. It depends on who you're talking about, what it's like living in communism. Who are you talking about here?
Are very various, depending on whom we are talking about. In my own private life, I never suffered from communism simply because I was brought up in a family of high-ranking military officers.
Listen to what he's saying. I never suffered from communism. It wasn't a big deal for me. It was beautiful for me. I loved it outside of the fact he's going to explain why he defected. From the perspective of the bourgeoisie, communism is great. That's what Yuri is saying. You know, I didn't have a problem with communism because I was a member of the bourgeoisie. I was a member of a high-ranking military official. We got everything we need. We had enough food. We had enough supplies. We had enough resources. We had enough, everything we need. We had because we were part of the bourgeoisie. We weren't part of the proletariat. This is what Yuri says here.
Crazy publishers. The differences, of course, in the daily life are very various, depending on whom we are talking about. In my own private life, I never suffered from communism simply because I was brought up in a family of high-ranking military officer. Most of the doors were open for me. Most of my expenses were paid by the government, and I never had any troubles with the
Never had no trouble. Everything was great for me because I was part of the bourgeoisie. I was part of the bourgeoisie. Everything was great for me.
My expenses were paid by the government.
In Animal Farm, everything's great for the pigs in Animal Farm. Everything's great for them.
And I never had any troubles with the authorities or with the police. So, in other words, I would say I enjoyed, or I had good reasons to enjoy, all the advantages of so-called socialist system. Mm-hmm. My main motivations to defect had nothing to do with affluence. It was mainly moral indignation, moral protest, rebellion against the inhuman methods.
Wow. Listen to what Yuri's saying here. He was saying, I lived high on the hog, pun intended, in socialism. I got everything I needed. Government paid for it. I was the bourgeoisie. I had every reason to enjoy socialism. Because if you're the bourgeoisie, you have every reason to enjoy socialism. Because you're sitting above everyone else as the bourgeoisie. And the workers are under you, the proletariat. I had every reason to enjoy socialism. I didn't have any problem with it. Got everything I needed. The reason I defected is because of morale. Because of moral reasons. Communism is immoral. And if you don't have any morality, if you're an immoral person, then you can live fine in communism as the bourgeoisie. You will have everything that you need. You will be king of the world if you don't have any morale, any moral. But Yuri says, I had moral indignation to communism because it was immoral. Wow.
I enjoyed, or I had good reasons to enjoy, all the advantages of so-called socialist system. Mm-hmm. My main motivations to defect had nothing to do with affluence. It was mainly moral indignation, moral protest, rebellion against the inhuman methods of the Soviet system.
Wow. So the revolution that is described in Animal Farm that set off the Bolshevik Revolution was the October Revolution in 1917. It actually started in November, and this was the Bolshevik Revolution. This is what Orwell that he writes about using. Satirizes. He satirizes in Animal Farm. The Bolshevik Revolution starts in 1917, in November 1917. In Animal Farm, in the book, the pig that leads the revolution is Old Major is his name in the book, but he's Vladimir Lenin. It's Lenin. Lenin leads the Bolshevik. But when the October Revolution started, where was Lenin? Well, Lenin was in Zurich, Switzerland. He was in Zurich, Switzerland. I asked this question. I love using AI now. If you're a researcher, AI is a game changer. You have to check it. It's not always right. But yeah. So I asked the question, and this is why I asked this question this way, because I wanted AI to give me, anyway, the question is, why Lenin considered disguise? He's considered using a disguise when the October Revolution began, because he's in Switzerland, okay? He's in Switzerland. He's here in Switzerland. Moscow's way over here. So he's got to go through Germany to get back to Moscow. And at this time, World War I was just winding down. Russia, it was part of World War I. Of course, Germany was, England, Britain was, but Vladimir Lenin was in Switzerland when the October Revolution started. We'll read what it says here. When the October Revolution began in Petrograd on 7 November 1917, Lenin was exiled into Zurich, Switzerland. The Bolsheviks had just seized power, but the situation was unstable, and Lenin's return to Russia was urgent to consolidate the revolution and lead the Bolsheviks. That the revolution could have failed, that there would have been no revolution. And Nicholas and his army would have been able to put down the revolution if there was not an old major, a pig there to lead the revolution. But Lenin was in Zurich in Switzerland. And he had to come back through Germany to get back to Russia quickly, too, to lead the revolution. It's very important. Lenin had been in Switzerland since 1916, living in a small room at Spyglass when news of the revolution broke. He realized that he had to get back to Russia quickly to turn the bourgeoisie revolution into a Bolshevik one. All normal trade routes were blocked. He couldn't get back through because all the normal trade routes were blocked. Blocked by who? Britain, which was still at war with Russia, refused to allow Lenin to return. Now, Britain, what you got to understand, Britain is run by Germans to this day. The British monarchy, Windsor monarchy, is not British; they're German. When the Stuart dynasty ended with Queen Anne, the Stuart dynasty had ended, and the people, the lords there in Britain, they wanted a Protestant, someone who they knew was going to be Protestant and didn't have the potential of taking them back to Catholicism. So they brought George over from Germany, and they made George the king, George the First. And he couldn't even speak any English. Part of the house of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. So they're German. You have to understand that. When World War I happened, this is a war with families, German family. The Kaiser in Germany was the grandson of Victoria, who Victoria's other grandson was leading the armies in Britain. It was a family affair. So Lenin needed to go back through Germany. The British, the Germans, were not allowing him to go back, but somehow he made it back just in time to lead the revolution. It wasn't by accident, people. There were powerful people. There were powerful people making the way for Lenin to go back and lead the revolution because they wanted the revolution to happen. We're going to listen to one more clip here from Yuri real quick. I see now that I'm running out of time, but I got so much that I want to share. Let's see what Yuri says here. What does Yuri say here? Hold on. Take a listen.
To enjoy socialism, people like myself, who were a member of journalistic elite, they also hate system for different reasons, though. Not because they lack material affluence, but because they are unfree to think, they're in constant fear, duplicity, split personality. And this is the greatest tragedy for my nation.
Well, what do you think are the chances of the people actually overcoming their system or replacing it?
There is a great possibility that system will sooner or later be destroyed from within. There is a self-destructive mechanism built into any socialist or communist or fascist system because there is lack of feedback, because the system does not rely upon loyalty of population. But until this Soviet junta is being supported by the Western so-called imperialists, that is, multinational companies, establishments, governments, and let's face it, intellectuals, so-called academia in the United States.
So I want you to understand what Yuri's saying here. So J. Griffin asked him, is there a chance that the Soviet system can collapse? And he says, yes, there's a self-destructive self-destruct mechanism within socialism, within communism, because it instills all of these things that Winston witnesses in Oceania, that Orwell writes about in 1984. It causes this fear, this suspicion amongst neighbors, all of these things that Orwell writes about Oceania in 1984. Those are self-destruct mechanisms that are inherent in the socialist system, is what Yuri is saying here. But he says that the USSR is being supported, funded, propped up by Western imperialists. I want you to listen to what he says here.
Because the system does not rely upon loyalty of population. But until this Soviet junta is being supported by the Western so-called imperialists, that is, multinational...
Western imperialists are supporting the Soviet system, is what Yuri is saying here, propping it up. They won't let it fail, is what he says. Says this in 1980. What is he talking about, people? What is he talking about? Western imperialists that are propping up the Soviet system. Talked about Joseph McCarthy in the last podcast. I didn't mention him by name because I was drawing blank on his name, but this is the senator from Wisconsin that I mentioned in the last podcast, that he was the chair of which committee was this? Or maybe I think it was the Foreign Relations. Let's see, it says right here, committee. Chair of the Senate Government Operations Committee. So I guess this is the committee that he was the chair of. But the Republicans were in power. So you got to understand the timeline. World War II ends in 1945. 5 years later, you're in the 1950s. The 1950s were a transformative decade. This is when all of this comes into play. The Eisenhower administration starts in 1953, and most of the stuff all of it is just these people took over our country in this decade, in the 1950s. And that's what Joseph McCarthy, the term McCarthyism. Joseph McCarthy, ultimately it was here. It says the term McCarthyism, coined in 1950 in reference to McCarthy's practices, was soon applied to similar anti-communist activities. So any anti-communist activity, and there was a thriving communist movement in the United States. We're not talking about in the USSR. We're not talking about in Europe. We're talking about in the United States. There's always been there was a communist party, a huge communist movement here in the United States. And this is what McCarthy was sniffing out. He was accusing people in Hollywood. He was accusing people in government. He was bringing them in, questioning them, to answer a question about their allegiance to communism, and calling them communists and communists, that there's a problem with communists and communist sympathizers, is what he said. Communists and communist sympathizers. Important thing to understand, too. In the Senate, one of his Senate colleagues at this time was the Democrat senator, we listened to his speech earlier, John Kennedy. John Kennedy was a Senate colleague of Joseph McCarthy when the McCarthyism hearings were going on. We're almost out of time. We're going to listen to President Trump and the speech he gave over 4th of July.
And all these talks from the communists, they haven't got a chance. Not even a chance. We don't want communists in our country.
We don't want communists.
Never worked, and it never will work.
Never worked, and it never will work.
Americans must never forget we are a historic and heroic people with a heroic spirit and a heroic purpose on this beautiful earth of ours.
And he goes into more. I didn't have it set up anyway, but yes, man, it never worked and it never will work. And they were here subverting our system starting, maybe long before the 1950s. But the point I wanted to make, and I made about McCarthy in the last podcast, is that you may not have liked his tactics, but he wasn't wrong. He wasn't wrong at all. There were communists in this country, communists and communist sympathizers, looking to undermine in very high positions, in positions of high power, looking to undermine our system of government. Now, McCarthy was censored. You see here, it says ultimately he was censored by the Senate for refusing to cooperate and abusing members of the committee. So, who led the censor of Joseph McCarthy? Well, it was another one of his Senate colleagues, this guy, Prescott Bush. Prescott Bush, American banker and grandfather of George W. Bush, father of George H.W. Bush, Prescott Bush led the censure of Joseph McCarthy. Now, Joseph McCarthy and Prescott Bush, they're members of the same party. Both of them were Republicans, and the Republicans were in charge in the 1950s. Go to ChatGPT. Again, I love the AI, and you ask ChatGPT, like I did Prescott Bush play any role in the censure of Joseph McCarthy? Yes, ChatGPT said. Prescott Bush played a modest but a real role in the censure of Joseph McCarthy. Why does it say modest? Because what Prescott Bush had to do, he had to be subtle. He had to be crafty, like the snake. He had to be sneaky. He couldn't organize the censor and organize the Democrats that censor McCarthy out front because he's in the same party as McCarthy. So he did it behind the scene. Yes, Prescott Bush played a modest but real role in the censure of Joseph McCarthy. Bush, a Republican senator from Connecticut, was one of the Republicans who became increasingly concerned about Joseph McCarthy. Why is Prescott Bush so concerned with McCarthy sniffing out communists and communist sympathizers in this country? Why? Why was Prescott Bush? Oh, my God. I don't have any more time. We have to pick this back up. We will be picking this back up on Friday. It says Prescott Bush was a banker. What bank did Prescott Bush work for? Well, the bank that Prescott Bush worked for and that he was a banker with is this bank, Brown Brothers Harriman. Who's Brown Brothers Harriman? Well, Brown Brothers Harriman is this bank. Let's just read what it says here in the Wikipedia page. The oldest and largest private investment banks in the United States merged. Brown Brothers Harriman formed. Brown Brothers Harriman is also notable for the number of influential American politicians, government appointees, cabinet members who have worked for the company, such as Averell Harriman. He's a founder. Who's Averell Harriman? Averell Harriman. Averell Harriman. Let's look at what Averell Harriman did as a politician, not only as a banker. You go down here and you see what Averell Harriman did from 1943 to 1946. In case World War II ends in 1945, Averell Harriman was an ambassador to the Soviet Union. Averell Harriman, ambassador to the Soviet Union during the end of World War II. Averell Harriman, who started the bank that Bush worked for. Averell Harriman is actually a fraternity brother, Skull and Bones fraternity brother of Prescott Bush. They're both Skull and Bones at Yale. Fraternity brothers. They both go into banking together. They both go into politics. One is a Democrat. One is a Republican. There's cabinet members is Averell Harriman, Prescott Bush, Robert LeVay, Richard Fisher, Alan Greenspan, our current Treasury Secretary, Scott Bassett, worked for Brown Brothers Harriman. Jeez, folks. I'm out of time. We'll pick this back up in the next podcast. I have a lot more to share with you. Hope you guys have a great week, and I'll see you on Friday.